Hello and welcome to a new Games That Weren't video where we're going to be taking a special look today at the recently recovered Total Recall version 1, which was a abandoned development done across a number of platforms by Active Minds for Ocean Software back in 1990. So many of you will be very familiar with the game that was released, and here is the 64 edition that you can see here with the title screen, loading screen done by Stephen Thompson. And many of you will remember the game looking like this, where you go around smashing crates and jumping around platforms, going up lifts, shooting bad guys, and kind of getting one end to the map to the other, and that kind of thing. Um, but I mean, most of the game kind of got a relatively good reviews in magazines. It was a fairly standard Ocean Software platformer affair. I quite enjoyed it actually, but I know some people found that the game was a bit claustrophobic and a bit unforgiving in places and a little bit glitchy. But yeah, I still liked it regardless. But what many of us may not have realised was about the troubled development past that the game had. It wasn't unless you maybe read something like Zzap 64 that you may have discovered that there was a different programming team at one stage behind the game. So Zzap back in October 1990 did an article on a company called Active Minds that had just started up in Manchester, just down the road from Ocean Software, and they were working on some big name titles for companies, such as Ocean. So one of the other titles that they were working on was Gaza 2 for Empire Software. But for Ocean Software, they got a major gig with Total Recall, which was quite massive at the time, and quite a big risk really as well. But looking through the article, if you went to the second page, you'd notice that there were very different looking screenshots. Now, how we found it at Games That Weren't is when our actual website and project started up, one of the things that we would do is trawl through loads of old magazines, looking at old articles and trying to find snippets of information to cover games that weren't released on the C64. But we'd also additionally look for screenshots of games to see, kind of look out for any major differences compared to the final version. And this one in particular, when I came across this article, it stood out like a sore thumb because looking at these screenshots in detail, these were not Total Recall, not the Total Recall that I knew and loved at the time. Um, it didn't even look like it was an earlier iteration or build. This was just a completely different game. So upon reading the article, it becomes clear that there was a different development team at that stage on the game. So we created an entry on the website for Total Recall V1 to kind of look out for this earlier development um, because we're kind of curious about how it played. I mean, there's a very different game here. How complete was it? How far did it get? How did it play? Did it play better than the released version? There was all those kind of questions. And when you look at a static screenshot, it's kind of exciting as well to kind of imagine in your head how that game might play. And it's one of those things that we kind of had to imagine for many, many years, and 23 years to be precise. So when we were doing our search originally, we were looking for the programmer that was mentioned, Mike Lyons, who had previously worked at Maelstrom Games on War in the Middle Earth. So he'd gone to Active Minds, started working on Total Recall, and been there for a little while, and things had been going fairly well. Um, and that's how it kind of sounded in the piece. But Mike was extremely hard to try and track down. We did a number of searches on Facebook and LinkedIn and various other places over the years. We got in touch with ex-colleagues that worked with him, and none of them knew where Mike was anymore. He'd sort of disappeared off the face of the earth. We did contact a couple of people on Facebook and send out messages, all coming back negative, saying it wasn't them and that kind of thing. Simon Butler was a bit easier to find. Thankfully, he was a bit more vocal on the internet and available to speak to. And he gave a fantastic account of his time working on the project and gave a great insight about the troubled development and issues that were going on behind the scenes. So the first thing in particular was that the game design was quite poor and quite all over the place. And also, a lot of the graphics hadn't really been done to a decent standard. So Simon came in and kind of helped to overhaul things and try and get things back on track. So we started to end up with a game design that was looking more like this in those screenshots. And this is probably at the point where things were starting to come together. Before that, it was looking pretty bleak that they would actually get a game released for Christmas, which was what Ocean Software were looking for and hoping for. So Simon gave an account about that and about how things happened. But essentially, progress, even though he kind of came in and helped to overhaul things, progress still wasn't very good. So he had to end up going back to Ocean to kind of highlight the issues with the development. And then when Ocean went down themselves, the actual management, to see how things were progressing, they came back and were quite shocked. And it was quite clear they weren't going to get their Christmas #1. So Simon helped to assemble a team, which of some of the people from Active Minds and also some people from Ocean to kind of try and salvage the project, so we could end up with the game that was actually released in the end. So the game that you see here on the 64 in particular was only cobbled together within 2 to 3 weeks, which is quite incredible, really. But it was based on loads of different routines from past projects, sort of all pulled together, and from numerous people contributing bits and pieces to get a game out just in time so Ocean could, get some decent money back from the license. But of course, none of us knew this, not until we started doing some more investigations on it, and Simon sort of gave his recollections about the game. So Mark Jones was the artist on the ZX Spectrum version. So in the meantime, he was quite good at trying to, keeping hold of all of his old stuff. Simon Butler sadly didn't have anything of the 64 edition, but Mark did. He kept all of his graphics and over the years has recovered bits and pieces. But it was discovered later on that there was a rolling demo of the Active Minds version of the ZX Spectrum edition released on a Spanish, I think it was a tape magazine or something. But it wasn't playable. You kind of just saw a portion of the map and that was it. And thankfully, Mark had got in touch with one of his old developer friends from back in the day, who was a dab hand at sort of hacking around in Spectrum memory and with code, doing cheats and those kind of things. And they took a look at the rolling demo and managed to get it to be playable again. And with it being playable, Mark was able to make a video of the game, which you can see running here, where you can actually explore a lot more of the map and much more of the game that was kind of tucked away in that rolling demo. So it was quite an incredible discovery and finding overall, a really good finding. But of course, I mean that's great as someone who loves unreleased games, but for someone who has an interest in the C64 stuff, I was still desperate to kind of find the 64 edition. But with Mike Lyons being very much at large, it was looking quite bleak. So it was one of those things that we kind of chase up periodically, try different routes and different sources to see if we could find anything. And then out of the blue, Mike got in touch and found our website talking about the game, and he got in touch and hopefully so we could put him in touch with Chris Pink and other people that he'd been previously in touch with. So the first thing we asked is what happened to the game and did he still have it? And tragically, he turned around and said that when he left Active Minds, everything was given back, including all the source code, and he didn't have anything, or he didn't think he had anything anyway. But one of the things that Mike revealed is that he only spent 3 months overall working on the game. Essentially, what happened is that Active Minds weren't quite forthcoming with payments, so he decided to leave and move on to a different company to do some work. So that was it really, and that was at the point where he handed everything back. So things didn't progress as far as the ZX Spectrum version at all. But when all seemed to be lost of actually finding the game, whilst Mike was going through some discs, he looking for some source code for War in the Middle Earth for me to sort of help him back up, he discovered something called R demo. Upon loading it and listing the contents, it came back with a expert cartridge sys code, and when he ran it, this is what he ended up with. So a major shock. So this is the original Total Recall that was being worked on by Mike Lyons and which was thought to be completely lost just about a month ago or so. So Mike must have compiled this from PDS and then sent it down to his 64, and then once it had actually compiled and started running, he just quickly froze it with his expert cartridge that he had, saved it, and then forgot about it. And thankfully, he still had it. And this is what we believe is the final build of the game before he gave everything back. So at the point where he left Active Minds, and that seems to make the most sense overall. And after sort of sending a quick video clip on his mobile phone, he was very quick to sort of back it up onto a disk and send it down to GTW so we could back it up and preserve it and make it available like we have done just recently. So what I'm going to do now is just sort of give you a quick guide of the game. So as you notice, the only thing I can do really is punch the enemies. There's no gun or anything like that just yet. I can't jump either, which I don't know if that was ever intended or if it was just to be able to use these lifts that we're going to see in a moment. But the idea of the level is to kind of collect those 5 items that you can see in the bottom right hand corner. So we have to search around the map for those items. But the initial thing I was trying to figure out at the start was how do we actually activate the gun? And doing a lot of button mashing didn't really result in anything positive. And it wasn't until I sort of went to the far end of the map that I found something that looked a bit odd, which didn't quite look like anything in particular. So it's got this like white square thing there, which we assume must be the gun that was never drawn in. So when we pick it up, we press down and fire now, the gun activates and we can now start blasting the enemies. So with a nice little animation effect. Yeah, so the idea of this was to kind of go around on the lifts and go from platform to platform and try and find the different components that you can see in that bottom right hand corner. So I don't know, I was going to say I won't find something, but there's one of the items. If I press down, that's going to disappear. And it's quite a large map overall. We think this is when Arnie's getting chased before he gets into the Johnny cab. But this is quite a large map overall that we have to kind of search and find these icons. And then once we found them, we can then sort of get to a phone booth at the end, which I'm going to skip to now really quickly. So this is something I've just saved a snapshot of. So at this stage, I've collected all 5 of the items and I've got to the end of the map. And we can see we've got a phone booth and a taxi bit. But before I sort of go on and finish the level, just going to highlight that if we look above the phone booth, there is some text there in low res, so it's not shown in the correct res. If we go back to those Zzap screenshots that were shown, we can see that there's high res elements in the background map which were not actually present in this build. We think these are probably mock-ups as a result. So the score panel at the bottom is static, for instance, and also on the first screen there's what seems to be a ladder possibly on the left hand side, which doesn't feature in a demo. We've only got lifts. So it might be that these screens that you saw in Zzap were just kind of mock-ups, just showing how the graphics all fitted together and Mike trying to get a feel for everything and the graphics that were being supplied to him. But yeah, in the actual game itself, it kind of everything's low res in the main screen. When you look in the high res, like a high res view of the screen, you can see that's how they should have looked. So we don't know if that was something that Mike was going to enable at a later date, or if it's just disabled for this demo, maybe because of glitches getting sort of multiple resolutions in the scroll or something like that. We don't know. Mike couldn't recall after all this time. But in this screen in particular, from the Zzap screen, it's what we think that's possibly like a high-res picture of Arnie in the background based on that kind of half picture we see of him in the film poster. So that might actually still be tucked away in the character set within the game, and it might be possible to enable those high-res elements. So maybe it's something we need to further poke around and see if we can find or switch on. But anyway, for now, let's go on to the second level. So if we touch the phone box, we then move on to what we think is either level 3 or level 4. So in the design documents which Mark Jones kindly dug out and shared, it talks about level 2 being a top-down sort of driving level. So probably where you're in the Johnny cab trying to escape from the bad guys. So we think this is the scene after that, where he's actually got to the factory and he's trying to sort of get away. Now this level's nowhere near complete. It's very glitchy. We think that the map's just been inserted in here and it's just been enabled as a level, but there's no actual objectives or anything to do. Even though we've got objects there on the screen, there's nothing to collect. You can sort of beat up enemies. If I beat up, they seem to be shooting a bit quicker as well, a bit more frantic. There's a bit of a glitch with the death sprites there. And we think the death sprite there as well is Arnie's death, which has been disabled in this preview. They've just used his death sequence for now, and I suspect that Simon would have supplied more graphics at a later date. But that's as far as it got, really. You can. This is a fairly sized map which you can sort of explore and get around. If you manage to get beyond the boundaries, then one of the things you'll find is that you can fall out of the map and the game will crash. But it's a great indication of how the game could have felt and played. There's nothing of the car top-down driving level for level 2 in the code. We think that Mike focused on the platform levels just initially, and would have done the driving sections a bit later on, but never got the chance. We think this was pretty much it. So there you go. That is Total Recall, and this can be found on our website, where we have the full story about how the game was found and the kind of the story about how we searched for it and how we've recovered it, but also Simon Butler's full sort of story in his own words about what happened, various gallery options, and of course a download that you can check out for yourself. So you can download this and you can load it up within any emulator, or you can load it on the real thing if you want to. So have fun, and we hope you enjoy the demo, and really pleased from the positive feedback we've had so far from this finding. Thank you for all the kind words. We look forward to the next recovery that we have, when we do have a couple coming up shortly, including something you might not be expecting. So stay tuned, and yeah, enjoy the site, and speak to you soon.